So good afternoon for those of you there, and good morning for those of us in the United States on the East Coast. I am Caroline Saccucci from the Library of Congress, and I will be giving a presentation about how the Library of Congress is integrating ISNI in the pre-publication metadata workflows at the library. Next slide, please. Just for some context, I'd like to tell you about the CIP program, or Cataloging Publication, or CIP. It was established in 1971 for the benefit of US publishers and US libraries. And we have over 2,400 publishers and imprints that participate in the CIP program. And we receive over 3,000 CIP requests per year, per month, over 40,000, 30 to 40,000 per year in Prepub BookLink. So it's a very heavy workload. And we create MARC records for the CIP titles, and we distribute those through the metadata supply chain and send a CIP data block, which an example of which you see below on that screen. And we send that back to publishers, and they would print that on the inside of their book, usually on the copyright page. And CIP requests generate thousands of new and updated name authority records. So it's a very heavy authority record workflow. Next slide, please. The current ISNI workflow, which we established in the summertime, I would say in 2021, that publishers can manually add an ISNI to the contributor information in a CIP request. So if they know the ISNI for that particular author or editor or contributor, we also provide a link to the ISNI database if they want to search for the ISNI. The cataloger creates or updates the NACO name authority record during the CIP cataloging process. The CIP data is sent to the publisher. The CIP record is distributed to users, and CIP program staff search after the fact for the ISNI that was added by the publisher and add it to the NACO records. And currently, it's a small workflow at this point. We've received 812 CIP requests that contain over 1,000 ISNIs, because some titles will have a submission of more than one ISNI. And at the bottom of the screen, you see the request database, Prepub BookLink. And once a publisher is in the program, they can use this to submit their requests. Next slide, please. So here is that piece of the workflow in Prepub BookLink, where a publisher can manually enter the ISNI and link to the ISNI database. Next slide, please. So after the ISNI will be added to the contributor table in Prepub BookLink, which the CIP program staff can see. Anyone who's in the system can see it, but we're not asking catalogers to pay attention to that. Right now, it's mapping from the CIP request to this place in the contributor table, where you also see the name, the first name, last name, date of birth, if it's available. There could also be, I didn't show it on this slide because it would be too long, but there's also a place for additional information such as affiliation, et cetera. So the program staff and the CIP program staff will query Prepub BookLink to find those ISNIs and manually add them to the completed NACO records. And we have a macro that is to make sure that they are creating the ISNI URI correctly, or the whole metadata field. So in the 024 field of a NACO record, or it looks yellow in our database. So, and this is the way it looks in our ILS for a cataloger. The 024 field there is added in a macro created to provide that information. Next slide, please. So how can the CIP program automate the workflow and increase the number of ISNIs is really the heart of what I want to look at, because right now it's a very manual process. It's not a very widely used process, and it's really not, it was never intended to be the one stop. It was always intended to be more development, but of course, development takes time. So next slide, please. So ideas that we have is ONYX metadata that we receive that's ingested into Prepub BookLink is parsed and stored in a products table, and it's used for lookups. So it's used for lookups by publishers when they're submitting a request. They can do a lookup and sort of pre-populate much of the CIP request with that information. And it's also used in the cataloging workflow to pre-populate BISAC terms, which are the subject codes that are from the Book Industry Study Group, and also summaries. So if we want to include ISNI, then we would also need to include that as one of the pieces of metadata that is mapped to this products table. So that's a goal. Next slide, please. We also would map the ISNI to each contributor field and add it as a URI in this MARC editor. So the MARC editor is the place where the metadata that the publisher submitted, they didn't know it was metadata, but it becomes our metadata, is converted into what's a MARC editor that is editable. Things can be moved around and fields added and deleted and subfields added before it actually lands in our ILS. At this point, there is no ability to look up a NACO information, but we would like to add the ability to search in NACO to see if the authority record is even needed. Right now, the cataloger has to wait till the record is in the local database and then do authority records. So this way, it would actually solve two problems. It would solve the problem of waiting, and maybe they'd like to do the authority record at that or find out if an authority record is even needed. But if there were an ISNI lookup in the authority record, in the NACO file, that could be a step. And then we would have a macro enabled to add the formatted ISNI data that we have from that's added to this field in the MARC editor. Next slide, please. The PCN program, the pre-assigned control number program, is sort of a sister program to the SIP program. So this is PCN in this case is the Library of Congress control number, the pre-assigned Library of Congress control number, because most of the time a book comes in, and at that point the LCCN, the control number, is assigned. But in this case, it's pre-assigned. And publishers get that number and they can add it to print it in their book. And we have over 17,000 authors, self-publishers, and traditional publishers that participate. It's a very large workflow of 4,500 PCN requests getting submitted per month. So 4,500 PCN requests, 3,000 SIP requests. It's very heavy. For the PCN program, we create a brief bibliographic record for each publication. And there's an example of how the information looks for the publisher. And if you've seen a book that has that, that's what it is. There is no name authority record creation or updating at this stage. Next slide, please. So if we want to increase the number of ISNIs that publishers can and authors can have for their titles, or for the contributors of their titles, one way to do that would be to include ISNI in the PCN, or add the PCN workflow, add ISNI to the PCN workflow. Right now it's limited to the SIP workflow. So like we did for the SIP workflow, we could include a field in these PCN request. And this, just putting that field in would be a little bit more awareness for ISNI for authors and publishers. So I think that would already be a first step. So even if they didn't use it, at least having the awareness of what is this thing? So put it there, and perhaps we would get some ISNIs that way. They could search for their ISNIs, find out more about it. We could consider a registration option at the Library of Congress for authors and publishers for ISNI. Next slide, please. Again, ONIX is only for the SIP workflow at the moment. So we would, and it's something we want to do anyway, and that's implement the ONIX workflow for authors and publishers in the PCN program. We have publishers that have ONIX, we just don't have that workflow embedded. And then we could add ISNI as a field that maps to the contributor table in Prepub BookLink as a lookup option. Next slide, please. Now, for the MARC editor, it's the same workflow for this MARC editor, in the sense that the data that the publisher submits is converted to MARC-ish data that will then be created and implemented and inserted into our database as MARC data. This is sort of a MARC lookup, sort of looks like MARC. Again, add the ISNI as $1 in this field, so it would be available, but not necessarily, we wouldn't want necessarily a NACO lookup here, because again, this is a workflow that doesn't have authority record creation or updating as part of its workflow. But if we converted that to the ILS, if basically we took the ISNI that's inserted into that field in the MARC editor and added it to the data that's converted. Next slide, please. Then we would be able to have that ISNI at the time of cataloging. Because what happens is the book comes in, and at that point, that's when the cataloging is actually completed. And catalogers don't search in PrePubBookLink in a post-publication workflow for anything. They don't use it for either SIP requests when the books are published and arrive, and they don't use it for PCN. Instead, they look at the work on hand, the physical thing, and they use that resource as their workflow. So they have no access to the ISNI easily without having to search for it in the ISNI database. So in order to provide it to them as something that could be converted through a macro into an authority record, if we have it as part of the metadata that's created and sitting there waiting for them in the MARC record, then they would be available for them. And there's an example of what it would look like. And there's no harm, no foul, because it's sitting there. It's not distributed, nothing's happening to it. And at the time of cataloging, of course, the hope is that there's more information about the author in the book itself, affiliation, date of birth, things that can break conflicts that the name authority workflow requires. Next slide, please. So we have, of course, development wish lists. We use the Agile methodology that we have user stories that are created. As a publisher, I would like to add my ISNI, or I would like the ability to search for ISNI for my request. As a PrePubBookLink user, I would like the ability to have the ISNI mapped to the products table for Onyx. That's sort of how stories are created or written. And then the development and the testing and implementation and production sort of follows along that line. So we have to come up with those user stories, have the development prioritized, then the testing and production. And of course, all of that is dependent on Library of Congress priorities and resources. We want to explore ways to provide authors and publishers with ISNIs for future use in the publishing supply chain. And there are lots of conversations going on in the various ISNI-related groups that you can find information about on the ISNI page. There's community information, and these are some of the working groups. So the ISNI Library Sector Consultation Group, the ISNIs and the Book Supply Chain Working Group is a subgroup of that, and I'm on both of those groups. There's the ISNI Book Publishing Consultation Group, which is starting up. And again, it's really important to figure out how can we get the ISNI, if we have the ISNI, how can we get it back to the publisher, keep the supply chain going. And then the Book Industry Study Group Metadata Committee, which I sit on, and we have these conversations as well. And then to explore methods to automatically generate and or add ISNIs to NACO records outside of the SIP and PCN workflows. Ideally, we would be able to have it automated so that nobody's worried about whether or not an ISNI is there or is not there, that it could be generated automatically in an API kicked off to search the ISNI database based on NACO records that are created and updated by our catalogers. So those are our sort of next steps. This, as I said, was a visionary talk as much as anything, because I have lots of ideas about how to improve and enhance the workflow and to increase the number of ISNIs that we see in the pre-publication workflow for the Library of Congress. Next slide, please. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions.